All right, hi folks. I'm recording a short video here it's coming from section 4.3 on rational functions. And I want to go over an example that discusses asymptotes. So this is horizontal asymptotes and vertical asymptotes. So let's take a look. Here's a graph. And notice on this graph there are these red dashed lines. What these red dashed lines are showing you are asymptotes. So this vertical line here, this red dashed vertical line, is called a vertical asymptote. What it means is the graph gets closer and closer to this vertical line, but does not touch the vertical line. It just gets closer and closer, so we call that a vertical asymptote. You might notice there's a horizontal line here. This red dashed line horizontally is called a horizontal asymptote. And again, the graph is getting closer and closer to this horizontal line, but not touching it. All right, well, let's take a look at this problem. First, it says, what's the domain and range? Well, to answer the domain, remember, that's the allowed x values. So to answer that question, what I'm going to do is look horizontally. Because if I can look horizontally at this graph, that's going to tell me information about the domain. When I look horizontally, I'm seeing that if I was to imagine all of the x values associated with these points I'm plotting here, these green points, x could take on any value, but notice x will never be equal to 2 because this vertical asymptote is at x equal 2. But the graph is never going to have an x value equal to 2 because the graph is going to get closer and closer to x equal 2, but never touch that vertical asymptote. So really the domain here is going to be all x values, but not -2. So the domain here is x equal -2. All right, it's also going to ask us about the range. Well, for the range, I'm going to look at this graph vertically. And when I look at vertical, the y values are going to be all y values except the y value of -3. So for the, because I'm seeing the horizontal asymptote is at y equal -3. But remember, the graph never touches y equal -3. So the domain, so this is the horizontal asymptote. By the way, for the domain, I should have written here x not equal to -2. Oh, I'm sorry, this should have been x. Let me fix this. I'm sorry, this should have been x not equal to 2 for the domain. So I should have written this as x not equal to 2. All right, what about the range? Again, the range is the set of allowed y values. But because this is horizontal asymptote at y equal -3, the y value is going to take on all values except -3. So I'm going to write the range as y not equal to -3. All right, then it's going to ask us, what are the intercepts? Well, the intercepts is any point where the graph crosses either the x-axis or the y-axis. Well, in our graph, there's really only one point where the graph crosses the x or y-axis. It happens to be, so for the intercepts, it's going to happen to be this point right here. So really, there's an intercept, and that point, of course, I could see is at 0, 0. So there's going to be an x-intercept at 0 and also a y-intercept at 0. All right, then it's going to ask us, what about horizontal asymptotes? Well, we already said that this red dashed line, the horizontal line, is at y equal -3. The vertical asymptote is the red vertical line that occurs at x equal 2. All right, so let's go ahead and enter the answers then here into MyMathLab. First, it wants to know what's the domain. Notice it says use an inequality. Well, we said the domain is x not equal to 2. Again, because of that vertical line at x equal 2, we know the x values can never take on the value 2. All right, now it wants to know what's the range. Well, again, the range is going to be all y values except -3, because there's a horizontal asymptote at -3 that the graph is never going to touch. So there will never be a y value of -3 for this graph. All right, find the x-intercepts. Where does the graph cross the x-axis? Well, there's only one location here, and that happens at x equals 0. All right, now it wants to know, what about the y-intercepts? Where does the graph cross the y-axis? Well, again, at y equals 0, the graph only crosses at one point there. What is the horizontal asymptote? Really, it's the equation of this horizontal red dashed line. That was y equal -3. What is the vertical asymptote? Well, the vertical asymptote is the equation of this vertical red dashed line, and that vertical line is the equation x equal 2. And one last question, it says, what about any oblique asymptotes? Well, an oblique asymptote is an asymptote that is not horizontal or vertical. It could be slanted. So let me give you an example. I might have a oblique asymptote that looks like this. And maybe the graph does something like this. So this is an oblique asymptote. I didn't draw that graph very well. Let me draw a better example here. So let me draw the axes like this. And maybe there is a vertical asymptote. Let me draw a vertical asymptote like this, let's say. But then maybe there's an oblique asymptote that does this. So this slanted line is an oblique asymptote. And then maybe a graph might look something like this. It might get closer and closer to the vertical asymptote and then get closer and closer to the oblique asymptote. And maybe here we do the same thing. But in our example, there are no oblique asymptotes. Our asymptotes here are only horizontal, vertical. So the answer to this question is no oblique asymptotes in this graph. All right, folks, hope this is helpful as you're working with horizontal and vertical asymptotes.